I'm David from Levika Photography, and today we are checking out the Sigma 16mm f1.4 DC-DN contemporary lens, weather sealed for micro four thirds. Whew, that was a lot to say. Anyway, this is 16mm on this camera. It's equivalent to 32 on full frame, and it looks big, but it's actually fairly lightweight, fairly well made. It has lots of SLD, FLD, and different types of lens coatings to control the chromatic aberrations. But how well does this work? We'll find out. But here, sitting on the table, I happen to have the 30mm f1.4 sitting next to it, so you can see how much larger this actually is. It's really a pretty big lens. And when you mount it on the camera body, you can see it's actually pretty substantial, but it's balanced nicely on the OMD-EM1 Mark II, which is what I'm going to shoot with today. And then it comes with a pedal style lens hood, and that's really pretty much all that it comes with. The packaging on this lens is actually very basic, but to give you an idea size-wise, this is its equivalent. The Olympus 17mm f1.8, and it is way bigger than that. I mean, it's just huge compared to this lens, but the image quality also reflects how much better it is than this lens. The only thing I wish that this lens had, that this lens does have, is the focus lock where you can bring it down and have an actual manual bump stop. This, no such thing. So for micro four thirds, you now have actually a pretty good lineup. This is the equivalent of 32 millimeters on full frame, and it's actually kind of a normal wide-ish lens. On the Sony E-mount, it's an equivalent of 24 millimeter, which is the beginning of a good wide-angle lens. And then we have the 30 millimeter 1.4 next to it, and then now this lens actually seems minuscule. Let me take the lens cap off. This is the Sigma 60mm f2.8DN. So this is really kind of a nice lineup. You know, a good portrait lens, normal focal use, kind of everyday, super fast lens. And then now you have what I like to call the street fighter, because this lens is just perfect for going out and shooting in the street in low light, and video is actually quite well on it. But let's see how well this performs. Okay, outdoor lens flared f1.4. And this last one is at f5.6. Just doesn't really seem to make that much of a difference, huh? Right, f1.4 on LED. This is what the lens flare looks like. And then f4 or f1.4 on CFL. It seems to be pretty good. It's not super great, but pretty good. Alright, so we're looking at an LED bulb, and this is f2.8. And there's some purple starring around the actual light. And then, of course, if you look at the lens flare off to the side, this has always been kind of a sticky point with Sigma. Their lens flare correction has always just been okay. Alright, when it comes to autofocusing, this lens actually does a really good job of tracking. And when you're switching between the background and an object, it actually has a really nice smooth transition. And manually focusing isn't nearly as bad as you think it would be, as I'm showing you here. Alright, so I'm out here with Esther, and we're going to take some quick shots with this lens and see what it looks like, just capturing some portrait level stuff. It is a little wider than normal, so this is more for like maybe an environmental portrait. We'll do some headshots just to give you an idea of what the bokeh is like. And I think it's going to be really good. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and shoot at f1.4. I did not have the proper step-up ring, so I just went ahead and gaffer taped on a 72mm neutral density filter, and this is an ND16, so that allowed me to shoot nice and slow at f1.4. And let me see what we got here. So I'm going to put this on ISO 200. We're going to try f1.4 at about 1/100th of a second. Okay, and I'm just using the little Godox TT350O for some floor light. So let's see what we have here. So this is more of an environmental portrait. This kind of taking you in with the environment. So this will be more of a... And the funny thing was, I was going to bring out the 8200 and I pulled it out of the car and the battery's dead. So that's my fault for leaving it in the car for like 3 weeks without charging it and not thinking about it. So we're using the Weenie TT350O, but I actually think it's going to work for it. So right there, I'm trying to get some of this arch in there. I'm going to shoot her at f1.4, and then we're going to bring the f-stop up to about f4 just so you can see what the difference is. Alright, let's take a look at a few of these images really quick. Here's Esther at f1.4, and you know, this was just a really quick 25-minute photo shoot. So we didn't really have a lot of time to shoot because we had a busy day, but I just wanted to show you what this is capable of. And at f1.4, this thing is just amazing. This is the equivalent of 35mm on full frame, but this is on micro four thirds. And you can see, you know, there's just the slightest bit of chromatic aberration in the reflections from the flash in her eyes. But outside of that, this is extremely clean. And I did turn off the lens correction utility in the Olympus RAW viewer before I brought these into Photoshop, just so I could see what they look like uncorrected. And, I mean, really surprisingly good. And the bokeh here, by the way, is really nice too, and there's a lot of color information in there. Like, I could bring that back a lot if I wanted to. Alright, this one was with natural light only, and again, the same thing. Really sharp, lots of detail, and the background is holding up really well. You can see it's not completely blown out. There is some faint color back there, and really, really incredibly sharp. I mean, just kind of mind-blowing. And the foreground actually looks pretty good too, you know. So depth of field wise, we have her face to her hands in focus, so turned out really well. And then this shot right here is at f1.4, and this is the one I told you guys I shot at f1.4. And I just wanted to show you what the detail looked like, and unfortunately my focus was hitting this tree, so she wasn't quite in focus, just slightly out of focus. But again, this is with lens corrections turned off, and still very sharp, but when we get down here into the foreground, we can see just a little bit of chromatic aberrations happening. And on the basket, it's not completely uncorrectable, but that does have to be manually corrected to get that to work. And lens flare wise, it actually looks pretty smooth, so no complaints there. And you can see, you know, because of how soft it is in the front, it's a very shallow depth of field. Here's the same shot at f4, and you can see I hit the focus on the tree again, of course, and you know, she looks pretty good, and everything is really nice and sharp and in focus. But as I go down here, the chromatic aberrations are just gone, and you know, on this lens they're pretty much gone by f2. And f2.8 is looking amazing. At f4, this thing really starts to shine. And this is where the lens is actually at its sharpest in the center. So really pretty impressive. Oh, the one thing that is kind of interesting is notice our lens flare with the shape of the of the iris in there, and you can see there's a little bit of chromatic aberration on that. But I mean, that's typical Sigma, not a big deal. All right, let's talk about high-res mode really quick, and this is where this lens really shines. I test all of my Olympus and Micro Four Thirds lenses for high-res mode specifically because you'll know if there's flaws. You'll see them in high-res mode. And on my site, in my blog at lavikaphotography.com, I've got a list of my favorite Olympus lenses that hold up well in high-res mode. So I seriously suggest you guys check this out. But just to make this quick and short, the 30mm f1.4 was king before this lens. This lens is beating it ever so slightly. And I mean, this is just amazing. This is a high-res chart that I just kind of threw together because usually I test my lenses for resolution using the Nyquist rule, and 5 small charts just doesn't work in a high-res mode because everything resolves no matter what. So I just muddled this whole thing together to kind of give me an idea, and just look at the highlights on this page. This is a f2.8, and even the little specular highlights that are hitting the paper are all in focus, and everything's in focus. The extreme corners on this are really pretty impressive. Now look at the same shot at f1.4. And again, this is with lens corrections turned off, so you can see from 1.4 to f2.8 there is the slightest bit of barrel distortion happening at f1.4 that's kind of spherical but very minor. And again, of course, there's going to be a little bit of vignetting at f1.4. But you can see the center is still very sharp, not quite as sharp as it was at f1.4, but everything is still very legible, and this sharpens up really well. The extreme corners, however, aren't quite as sharp, but still pretty damn good. I mean, I am very impressed. This is the vignetting at f1.4, and you're looking at about 2 stops from the center to the extreme corners to correct, and so minor. And, by f2.8, they're gone. How does this hold up in low light? It's at f1.4 again, and it seems to actually do pretty well. I mean, there's a lot of detail there. It's not exactly perfect, but you can see that the coma on the lights are really kind of harsh at f1.4, but by f2 they clean up really well. Alright, this shot is at f1.4 ISO 400, and this was pretty much at infinity. Really overall, pretty clean. Really impressive, like how much you can actually get in focus at low light at sunset. Then I asked my assistant if I could take her photo really quick just to see how well this would do as a portrait lens in the evening. She was kind of irritated with me, but you can see she's perfectly in focus. And the reflection looks good, the lights and the reflection look really good. The lights on the trees themselves behind her look really good. I mean, this is just such a clean image. The lights above her look really good. So the closer you get to your light source, everything really starts to actually look pretty good. And this is probably a few minutes after the sun went down. Alright, then we found this gigantic ornament, and I asked her to step inside of it. That way I could get some blurriness in the foreground with some light in it, just to give us an idea of what the bokeh fringing looked like. And again, this seems to be extremely well controlled. We have a little bit of onioning on some of the lights, but really clean. So then I asked her if she could move out a little bit just to see what the bokeh looked like behind her. And, again, extremely clean. I mean, just really an impressive lens, especially for the price. But the funny thing was, she started to get a little irritated with me at this point. So then all of a sudden you could see she started to change a little bit. And then this happened. I'd have to go do low lights somewhere else. So I picked this guy up from the airport, CW Square. Actually, my wife did. And we all went down to the World of Lights Festival. So these are the images that I caught from that, mostly at f1.4. There are a few where everything was at focus at f2. Russia, we like potato. Potato, very good, very nutritious. I like it a lot. I like the vodka made with the potato. All right, so I know a lot of you out there want to know how this would compare to the Olympus 17mm f1.2 Pro lens. And I can't tell you because I don't have that lens. But what I can tell you is that I can definitely easily compare this to the 30mm f1.4 DC-DM lens. This lens is actually slightly sharper all the way across the board. I couldn't believe that it was like that, but it is. And in high-res mode, this lens is flawless. And the funny thing is, this is our studio camera right here, this massive pig, and this is the 5DS. And on here I've got a 24 to 35mm f2 art lens, and realistically, when I compared the two of these together, this one actually seemed to have less vignetting overall, even though they were evenly sharper. The full frame Sigma had better corners because on Micro Four Thirds, corners are tougher to render than a full frame. And the reason why is because you've got 4mm of glass sitting on top of the sensor, and that's your actual ultraviolet cut filter, and it's just really thick on 4/3. I don't know why they ever made it so thick. If that could get like, I don't know, to 1mm, then yeah, this thing would be sharp in the corners. But anyway, on the Sony a6000, a6300, a6500, this is going to be the equivalent of 24mm, slightly wider, just a very good, fast, wide-angle lens. And this is perfect for street photography. It's a little too narrow to do astrophotography, but the coma does actually seem to be pretty calm on it. Overall, I think it's actually just a great lens for doing street photography, environmental portraits, general video work, which is actually what I'm going to use it for. This is going to become our primary video lens. So a couple other things I want to add to it. The front threads up here are 67mm. On the 17mm f1.2 Pro, they are 62, so this lens is slightly larger. I think it's probably a little lighter though. And then just to give you guys an idea, that is the 30mm DN. And then this is the Sigma 60mm, if you want to compare sizes. And then this is the lens it's actually replacing in our bag, and this is the Olympus 17mm f1.8. And notice the size difference. This is much smaller, but this is way, way sharper, with just way more accurate image quality. So I imagine this will probably actually be pretty good on a GH5 or the G9. But the one thing that I wish that this lens had that this does is a little focus lock to allow you to be able to bump stop the focus manually. This one, it's a little touchy when you're doing the fly-by-wire, but overall, continuous focus and the way that it follows in autofocus mode in video, it actually does a pretty good job. So anyway, I hope you guys like this video. Give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, otherwise we'll talk to you guys later. See ya.